It was spring. The school year was drawing to a close, and another boring day at school was giving me a headache. I went to the nurse's office, but after taking the pill that I always keep in my bag, I went straight home, bypassing the school nurse. At home, I watered the flowers, dusted, and started looking at old family photo albums. The memories flooded all over me, and I started crying softly. Mom, Dad, everything was so good. A solid family. Plenty of fun trips. Why did everything end like this? Suddenly, the phone rang. It was my neighbor calling. She anxiously asked where I was and why I left school. When I told the teacher that I would go to the nurse's office, I just came home. Mrs. Stevens, I'll be there soon. I replied, then put the albums back in place and went to the house next door. There was a hot lunch and a lot of questions were waiting for me. But even though my head didn't hurt, I still wasn't in any mood for conversation. Once I assured Mrs. Stevens, who was there to greet me, that I wasn't hungry at all, I locked myself in my room and looked out the window so I could see my family home. Through that window, until that night, fell the curtains as always blocked my view of my father's office. He didn't allow anyone to enter, and even after he left, he didn't leave a key behind. I had always wondered what was inside, and now I was one step away from learning the secret. My name is Linda, and for almost 2 years, I haven't seen or heard anything to do with my family. At the end of the last school year, my parents and younger sister went to Africa for the holidays. I can't stand the heat, so I refused to go with them, something I now regret very much. When they were about to leave, my parents asked their old friends from the house opposite, Mr. and Mrs. Stevens, to look after me. They're an elderly couple whose children grew up and moved out a long time ago. Since I was a kid, I often visited them and was glad to live with them for some time because they always loved and peppered me like their own granddaughter. The trip was supposed to last for exactly 5 weeks. But we stopped receiving calls from my parents after 4 days. I was worried, but Mr. Stevens assured me that it was difficult to get a signal where my parents and sister had gone. And they would definitely show up soon, but it still hasn't happened. And all this time I've been living with Mr. and Mrs. Stevens. Yes, they treat me like their own daughter or granddaughter, and they take care of me, but still I miss my own family very much and continue to dream of getting to see them. Time passed, and at some point I thought that some clues about the disappearance of my parents might be in my father's office. I started looking for ways to break the lock. It took almost a year because I'm not some gangster who can open any door with a knife. There was less than a day left before I would be able to get a key, and I had to try to sleep so I'd be fresh for the next day. The next morning, instead of going to school, I went to a designated deserted place, and from under a bench, I took out the key I needed. It was hidden there, especially for me. I wasn't sure about trusting any anonymous person from the internet, but this was my only chance. I was very nervous, but I wanted to quickly try to open that door, so I didn't hesitate. Fortunately, it didn't disappoint, and soon I found myself in that room. At last, everything was covered with a thick layer of dust. There were barely comprehensible drawings everywhere, so I decided to focus on my father's computer. Fortunately, there was a piece of paper with a password nearby, but it was encoded using various questions only. My dad knew the exact answers. I had to work on it, and it took me more than an hour to decipher it. On the computer, there were files and formats I didn't recognize. I decided to look at something familiar, my dad's email. Fortunately, the password was saved, and I was able to log in immediately. There were a lot of business emails that came a few months after my father's departure, and I decided to go back to the very date my parents announced they would leave. Found an invitation to a tour of Africa from a certain Thomas Schmidt. He suggested that Dad go there with him, and through several accommodation options, I decided to find out who he was because I had never heard that name from my parents before. With the help of social media, I found out that Thomas Schmidt was my father's work colleague, and a month after my family's disappearance, he was appointed the director of an oil company where he worked with my father. But why didn't Thomas himself disappear? Why was he actively uploading photos on social media if they agreed to go together? Surely he knew something. I was afraid to go to him directly, and hardly anyone would let a young girl into an oil company office. So I decided to contact my guardians. At first, Mr. and Mrs. Stevens asked me to put all this nonsense out of my head and said that whatever I did, my investigations would lead to nothing. They even said that they refused to help me, but in the end, they still put themselves in my shoes and agreed to help. Mr. Stevens listened to my story about what I learned in my father's office and then said that he had to tell me something very important. He asked me to try not to freak out and calmly listen to him, and then admitted that my father called him a week after he disappeared and said that they were captured by pirates who demanded a huge ransom. Dad knew he couldn't get that kind of money, even if he sold all of our property. So he just asked Mr. Stevens to take care of me and said goodbye. I was shocked and horrified by what I heard. Why didn't anyone tell me about that? Why was there a ransom of some engineer in the tens of millions of dollars? It turns out that my parents and sister were in serious danger all this time. And Mr. Stevens did absolutely nothing to help them in any way, and even decided to hide it from me. Oh my God. Fortunately, after a lot of persuading, Mr. Stevens agreed to go to Thomas with me. Thomas was very busy, and the other employees, upon finding out whose daughter I was, immediately became somewhat gloomy and silent. And all while we were waiting for Thomas, we still managed to find someone who was ready to talk. One of the employees of the company said in confidence that he could tell us something very important, which perhaps would help us find out the secret of my family's disappearance. We went to a place where no one would be able to hear our conversations, and the man said that before his disappearance, my father was the first in line for the post of the director of the company, and he was about to get the position. Thomas was the second after him, and since my dad was missing, it was Thomas who took the spot. Strange coincidence, isn't it? Soon Thomas had some time available, and we were invited into his office. He pretended to be very happy to see me, but at the same time, he didn't seem sincere regarding my problem. Thomas told us that his wife got sick right before the trip, and because of that, he couldn't go to Africa with my father. He had to cancel the trip right before the flight. Then he told me that he was very sorry about what happened. I immediately realized that there was something tricky about the way he talked. His speech sounded very stilted, and his eyes wandered during the conversation. After I got home, I thought for a long time about what to do next and how to find out what exactly Thomas didn't say. There had to be a clue. After giving it a lot of thought, one idea came to my mind. I decided to find Thomas's wife on social media and to write to her from a new account on behalf of the tour operator. I would send her a message that she was receiving compensation in the form of another tour to Africa because of the one she missed last year, and then I would offer to let her choose what date she preferred. I wasn't sure this idea would work, so I waited for her response with bated teeth. Soon she replied that she didn't understand what kind of African tour I was talking about, and that she would never voluntarily go there. Her husband told her that there was dangerous pirates and a lot of diseases there, and that it was very hot. She assumed it was some kind of mistake and said goodbye to me. So Thomas's wife didn't know about the trip at all and wasn't sick, but he knew about the pirates and was never planning to go to Africa. There were too many coincidences. Mr. Stevens thought so too, and he said that he would use his old connections to expose Thomas. The best detectives in the state took up the case of the disappearance of my parents and sister, and after a week, it finally got off the ground. It turned out that before my father could be appointed to the post of director, Thomas contacted a man from Africa via email and asked him to host someone for him, offering a very large sum of money. So they came to him with all the evidence and said that we would go to court, and he had a chance to mitigate the punishment if he cooperated. If my family was saved. But he continued to deny everything, and we decided to come at it from another direction. We contacted the same person from Africa via email, saying that we could offer him information about the ship on which the son of a very rich businessman will be. We actually went on a cruise on the ship ourselves. After warning the police in advance during the operation, they managed to detain the pirates who had no choice but to say where my parents and sister were. We managed to free them, and after a year of slavery, they were finally freed, although they no longer believed it was possible. I was so glad to see them alive and practically unharmed. My sister had grown a lot in a year, and my parents unfortunately had aged quite a bit. But most importantly, now we were together and safe. I finally went back to living in my own home, and I no longer had to live with my neighbors. Thomas was arrested, and the post of director of the company is still empty. But I'm not sure if my dad will be able to take that job after the nightmare he experienced. While it doesn't really matter, what do you know about pirates? Write your answers in the comments, click like under this video, and be sure to subscribe to our channel.
The children entered the room. On the table, a red container full of what appeared to be Legos rested. The children walked up to the container, and naturally kids began to play with the Legos. The children were unaware that in an adjoining room separated by a one-sided mirror, a team of 20 scientists analysed their every movement as they played innocently with the Legos. The children started to pick up building blocks, piecing them together and making makeshift houses. One of the 3 total children picked up a humanoid figure and started to cry out in shock. That's when the children realised that these Lego pieces were animated. The Lego man in the child's hand waved at them, and when the child placed the figure back on the table, it began to walk around as if it were alive. The children clapped their hands and squealed with delight and continued to play with the living Lego. On the other side of the glass mirror, the scientists scrawled down on their notepads frantically. SCP-387 is currently stationed in a standard storage container in Site 19. Due to SCP-387 posing no danger to humans, it has been stored in a container with no special make. SCP-387 is a tub of commercially available Legos, seemingly ordinary to the naked eye. There are, however, a few irregular shapes in the box of Legos, including circular wheels and prisms. It has no brand name, and all companies that were interviewed by undercover agents denied ever making SCP-387. Of course, after these interviews, the individuals' memories of SCP-387 were removed. An interesting feature of SCP-387 is that when the tub is not full or when it is partially empty, the Lego blocks will duplicate themselves until the box is full. When all pieces are removed from the tub but one, it did not duplicate. However, when Lego blocks were returned until an even layer was made, SCP-387 continued to duplicate. If an excess amount of Lego blocks were placed on top of the tub to prevent from closing the lid, SCP-387 would shrink to make room. When other objects were placed in the tub, for example, diamonds, it did not duplicate. When other Lego pieces from commercial brands were placed in the tub, they did not duplicate. It seems the tub is not what possesses duplicating properties, but SCP-387 must be in the tub in order to duplicate. SCP-387 will not duplicate in other random containers or spaces. Researchers guess this may be a ploy by the makers to avoid copyright of SCP-387. It is also interesting to see that when constructed by a human hand, SCP-387 will animate themselves. For example, a Lego man was placed inside a car. The Lego man proceeded to drive the car around, moving like a real person. The car toy was disassembled, and it is noted that it did not possess any complex machinery inside it. The cars also don't require fuel or any power source to move the Lego. People also have a form of sentience. They interact readily with each other, and when SCP-387 is left out on its own, the constructed buildings and people are quick to evolve. Lego men will take on police uniforms and roles where they find themselves along police cars. Lego people will use their own building blocks to construct skyscrapers and update infrastructure. They will expand their society through these means. SCP-387 does not seem to mind the presence of human interaction. But if a human turns hostile, SCP-387 will instantly lose sentience and become adamant. An experiment was conducted in which a plane constructed from normal Lego pieces was placed in a chamber with SCP-387. After a few minutes, the Lego people of SCP-387 moved and began to build an airport using pieces of SCP-387. A petrol tank drove over to the plane and seemed to fill it with fuel, even though it had been noted that vehicles of SCP-387 do not require fuel, and the plane proceeded to take off and fly through the air, zooming around the room. More planes were formed afterwards, each of different make and design, and this all took place within 3 hours. SCP-387 thus seems able to interact and evolve with normal Lego pieces. Judging by this, I'd say that constructions of SCP-387 have some form of understanding of the surrounding environment, and they are able to convert existing Lego to 387, says head scientist Dr. Arch. 387 was first found in February of 2004 by an agent of the SCP Foundation. The agent was returning home on a long train ride. He reported going to his seat, which was empty. He went to the bathroom and returned to find SCP-387 resting in the seat next to him. The lid was open and he reached in and constructed a Lego man. As soon as he completed the construction, miraculously the Lego man moved and walked around. The agent immediately disassembled the Lego man and brought SCP-387 straight to the SCP Foundation site. Security tapes from the train were quickly destroyed to avoid public knowledge. Dr. Arch advises that SCP-387 should not be given to children under the age of 10, especially if the aforementioned children are influenced by cartoons and television shows. This is due to an experiment conducted in March of 2015 in which 2 kids aged 5 and 8 were placed into the room with SCP-387. The children were given instructions to let their imaginations run wild, and the children proceeded to play with SCP-387. Once the kids realized the objects were animated, they were immediately excited and agreed to create warriors to fight in battles. These included a Transformers character, as well as an M1 Abrams tank. Once these objects were constructed, the kids were immediately removed from the room. At this point, the Transformer and M1 Abrams tank attacked each other, destroying each other in the process. It has been noted that these objects will not fire or attack when in the presence of humans. It appears SCP-387 relation to humans is positive. In another experiment, a robot arm was used to construct a car. The car did not animate. When a human hand constructed the car, it moved around. When the dead hand of a deceased agent was used to construct a car, it did not animate. When the dead hand was heated up and used to construct a car, the car still did not animate. Dr. Arch has concluded that SCP-387 seems to respond only to a pulse or some sign of human life. He also recommended that staff be allowed to play with SCP-387, as it has been reported that once an individual has played with SCP-387, morale and attitude have boosted by 87%. Staff members were thus allowed free time to interact with SCP-387, but of course with supervision. However, this permission was revoked after Incident 34AB2, where 2 staff members entered the room for the period with SCP-387, unknown to head scientist. One of the staff members had brought in her Mega Blocks, a common copy of Lego. The 2 staff members proceeded to build a small community with SCP-387, and they left the room, leaving the Mega Block figures with SCP-387. Security camera footage shows what occurred after all humans left the room. Slowly, together as one, the figures of SCP-387 turned to the Mega Block characters, and then they attacked. SCP-387 Lego people charged at the Mega Block characters, wielding swords and spears like an army of soldiers. Enhancement of security footage shows that the leader of sorts was commanding the army to attack the Mega Block pieces. Within a few minutes, the Mega Block pieces were reduced to debris, and SCP-387 continued as usual. The Mega Block characters did not defend themselves, of course, since they were inanimate, but that did not stop SCP-387. Once the Mega Block characters were defeated, SCP-387's community collected the debris and tossed it over the side of the table to fall on the floor. When the 2 staff members returned from work to play with SCP-387 and the Mega Block characters once again, they were surprised to find the Mega Block pieces were missing. SCP-387 did not behave differently after the incident, acting as if nothing had happened. If it weren't for the security camera footage, scientists would be unaware of the unusual ordeal that took place regarding the megablock pieces. As for the reason behind SCP-387's unorthodox behavior, Dr. Arch predicted that it may have something to do with SCP-387 being jealous of the megablock pieces. It is clear that SCP-387 possesses a good relationship with humans, and thus they may become jealous of any other LEGO-like character that could pose a threat to their good relationship with humans. Nonetheless, free time with SCP-387 has been limited to personnel, and only a select few with hard supervision are allowed to interact with SCP-387. SCP-387's strange duplication capabilities have also caused a number of theories to be developed among staff members. Many theorize that SCP-387 actually steals these extra pieces of LEGO from the other LEGO sets across the globe, and that is why children always seem to be losing LEGO pieces in their sets. Some believe that these LEGO pieces have been pulled from alternative universes, while others suggest SCP-387 is capable of altering the air and transforming mere nitrogen into carbon. These theories, however, are not soundproof, and their lacking of evidence indicates that these theories should only be taken lightly. Thanks for watching. Did you enjoy learning about SCP-387? What would you build if you had SCP-387 all to yourself? Comment below. Please also make sure you like and subscribe and hit that notification bell. You don't want to miss out on any of these awesome SCP cases.